Hello, I'm Kwame Stroman. I'm here with Kurt Schnid. I'm trying to figure out more about the TV industry. Kurt, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So, can you give me a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a director producer with magneticmediahd.com, and my mission is to change the way business people are seen by their audiences by identifying their ideal audiences and what they want out of those audiences. I then create messaging to get those audiences to do, think, or feel what that client wants them to.
Let's find out a little bit about you. Where'd you go to school?
So I went to high school in northern New Jersey at West Milford High School, and they had a really good television science program. And at different levels of school, the freshmen were allowed to do so much, the sophomores, juniors, and seniors. But I had shown an interest and a proclivity in video. I was allowed to do things sooner than some of the other students.
Okay.
I then took my high school experiences and went and did my undergrad at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. And there I really learned to study documentary and storytelling. I was fortunate enough to win a few awards, and the school offered me an exchange that they were trying to set up in Cambridge, England.
Oh, wow.
So I got to study communications in Cambridge. I came back, finished my undergrad at Marshall, and then attended the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C.
Oh, nice, nice. You did a little bit of traveling.
A little bit. So I lived in England for a while and came back to the States and then moved to Spain, Madrid, Spain, and lived there for a little while. Great experience.
How did traveling change your perspective on the communication media field?
Well, storytelling is an ancient art. And we think of modern television as maybe separate from that. But if you can bring the elements of plot development, character development, the reveal of the story, the twists, if you can bring that into your video production, you'll end up with a much more compelling piece.
What was your first job in this area of work that you do?
Here in D.C.?
Well, in general, what was your first job
Wow.
in the media field?
Well, I worked at the local cable station.
Okay.
And we did a local news show and a local sports show. I played American football as a kid, and I knew the formations, the plays, the rivalries. And so as an announcer on television, I was able to bring that inside knowledge to the sports program. As a newscaster, it was fun to write stories and to be on camera in front of the local community.
Mm-hmm.
But it was almost more fun for me to be in the studio and to work the chyron and the switcher and to call the shots and to again develop visually that story of back and forth and what camera we're going to take and so I liked more the production side than having to be responsible for being on camera and say things.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to be behind the scenes and setting up the lights and the microphones and whatnot.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I really don't like being in front of the camera. I really don't mind it, but
Right.
you know, when you're behind the scenes, you're able to to create the story and really mold it to how you want to be told. So, completely understand. How did you rise in the ranks of in your job? So you said you started out in CBS. So, what initiatives did you take, or how did you get to go behind the scenes?
For me, it was all about attitude and work ethic. When I'm on set, I try to do my job the best that I can, but I also look for gaps, holes in the production. And if I see something that needs to be done, I typically just do it without trying to step on anybody's toes. But if you come to the set, and in this television industry, things are stressful enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have early morning starts and late night finishes, and you might eat today, you might not eat today. But most of the producers that I worked for coming up had a very tight time schedule, what they wanted to get done on that week or that day. And oftentimes things like breaks or eating, they were not priority. And
Yeah.
so I never complained about it. I typically work through, and those are the types of things that people appreciate. It's also the way that you carry yourself. I found that as a PA in the television industry here, I would wear a sport coat and khakis. Oftentimes when we're working, it gets really hot, so I would take it off. But at the end of the day, when they were looking for somebody to move up, and they looked across the field of PAs, I felt like I stood out, and that's why I was asked to move up. I also like to write. And it's that storytelling, it's the ability to write the program and compile the beginning, the middle, the end, and write the words that tell the story concisely without any fluff, without any fat, so to speak. Something that most of the producers that I worked with really appreciated. And so as much as I gave, I took from them as well to kind of develop my own style of storytelling.
Okay, going off of that, you said you like to write, and I like to write as well, but what I find myself falling into is writer's block a lot. How do you overcome that? How do you overcome writer's block, or where do you look for creativity when you're writing?
Sure. I too have suffered from writer's block. You'll be on a certain topic or a certain storyline, and you get to a point where you just don't know where to go. I will oftentimes switch completely. So if I'm writing something that's really dramatic, maybe I'll write something that's kind of lovey-dovey, or something that's more criminal-based. You know, I'll just completely switch into sci-fi and just start writing. The other thing that I like to do is read. And so if I'm writing a piece, I'll try to find other things that are written like that and read and think about where my characters are going, where the plot is going, and just review, kind of step back, read what I've already written. And oftentimes I hit a block for a reason. Usually I hit a block because I've gone down a path I shouldn't have gone down. And as I review, I go back and I go, you know what? I'm going to go back to this point, and I'm going to go this direction. And then it flows. And so I think that you know inside, as you're writing, that you're going the wrong way.
Yeah.
And that's where the block comes.
So
go back and figure out where you made the wrong turn and make the correct turn, and it should open up for you.
Okay. So just kind of retrace your steps, and
Exactly.
You almost like you're telling the story the wrong way.
Or maybe not necessarily the wrong way, but there's a better way.
A better way. Okay. Nice. I definitely can see that. So as a producer, what's your day-to-day responsibilities?
The most part is client satisfaction. And so there's a lot of politics involved, some hand-holding. It all depends upon the client. If you have an experienced client, they are usually very good at articulating to you what they want, when they want it, how they want it done. And so your job is really to just fulfill. If you have an inexperienced client, oftentimes you do a lot more hand-holding, a lot more explaining, justifying why we do things the way we do. I'll give you an example. I have a customer that just wanted a video done, but didn't want to go through the time or expense of pre-production. And I warned her that that is the most important part. We have to figure all these things out on paper and talk them out before we just show up in Washington, D.C. with lights and cameras and expect to shoot. And she didn't see things my way. So we showed up on the mall to shoot her video, and we ran into a couple problems there: production, storyline, equipment, permission to be there. It was much more of a debacle than it should have been.
Okay. So what skills do you need to have to, let's say, push your clients in the right direction, or especially for like a inexperienced client? What's the best way to convey your ideas to them, saying like, hey, you need to get pre-production done, or I don't think this is the right way to do this, like X, Y, and Z? What?
Every situation is different, but you find ways of restating, re-emphasizing your position. And I don't really have a preference. I'm not locked into my own way of doing things. And so if I make a point or have a rule that I'd like to maintain with a client and we don't see eye to eye on it, I'll restate it a couple times. And then I'll give up and we'll go down their path and it'll work out or it won't work out. I try never to say I told you so.
Yeah.
But it's tempting sometimes to say, there's a reason why we do this the way that we do it. And it's just the inexperience that they have. Usually they come back and for the second project or third project, they say, this is what I want. You figure out how to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And that works out really, really well. Now they trust you. They know that you're quality, that you're not going to skimp on the procedures. It's going to be done right. And they can see the difference. That makes a customer a client.
Okay.
So a customer comes in, they want one job done. They want to be the boss, tell you what to do.
Yeah.
And as they learn that, their ways aren't always the best ways, they learn to trust you and they come back because they know, like, and trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're a client and you're their go-to guy and it'll be that way for years.
Okay, yeah. The customer isn't always right. That's what you're trying to tell me.
In some cases, the customer is not always right.
So what are some of the biggest challenges? You're kind of talking about it. Would you say that inexperienced clients or inexperienced customers are the biggest challenge, or is it something else?
Well, I think the biggest challenge in all projects comes in the messaging. And so if you're doing entertainment, you want to compel your audience to watch longer, to watch more often, and to talk about it offline. If you're doing corporate kind of projects, you really want to endear your audience with the message of that company. And it could be product quality, it could be reliability, it could be price, it could be philanthropic. It depends upon what the corporate mission is. But it's that messaging. It's being able to identify your audience, identify the goal of the project, and then write the messaging that gets that audience to that goal.
Okay.
And that's the real role of a good producer, is to figure out, here's where we're starting, and there's where we're going. How do we get there?
So how do you overcome this challenge?
Writing.
Writing?
Writing is the key. It's what separates everybody. The cameras today are so high quality, and there's a flood of talented production people in the market. What the industry needs more of is quality writers that can figure out what that process is between A and B. And so you can write a draft and redraft and redraft, and typically I'll redraft until I know it's right. Mm-hmm. There's a moment, there's like the light bulb goes on. You just know. You're like, that's it. And it's worth the work of sitting in a quiet space and writing and rewriting that stream of consciousness, trying to figure out what's going to work for the audience. And then test it. Have somebody else read it. If it sounds good on paper to them, chances are you're on the right path. Mm-hmm. And then you can call in the crew and set up lights and cameras. And that'll make your production far easier if you do your homework in pre-production.
Okay. Pre-production is key.
Absolutely.
So what is your creative process like when you're writing a story?
So creatively, I like to identify the audience first, and then find out what my project is, what my goal is. So if it's a story, a cop drama story per se, mm-hmm. then I want to do character development, character reveal. I like to do misleading things. Mm-hmm. So I like to show the audience one perspective that paints a picture, and then later on show the same scene from a different perspective.
I know what you're saying.
With the truth. And so the audience goes, oh, I thought that guy was the bad guy, and he was, and there's a reveal, there's an epiphany there, and it makes the story interesting. It holds the audience longer. It's fun.
So, what's your favorite aspect of being a producer? What's your favorite? What do you find most enjoyable?
It's got to be the end. You know, when you start off, there's a freshness to a project, and so most people are motivated. You're interested, and you start on the project. Somewhere in the middle, it becomes a pain in the butt.
Becomes a grind.
It is a grind, and if you're in production, you have those early mornings and late nights, and maybe you've eaten, maybe you haven't. Maybe it's sweltering hot, you know, maybe it's freezing cold. Whatever you go through in a production, at the end, when it all comes together and you have your release date and the client is happy and the bills are paid and you've learned something, you made new friends, there's a sense of accomplishment there. That's probably my favorite part, is reaching the end, reaching the summit, and you say, we made it.
Yeah.
You know, we climbed this mountain and we made it.
So, are there any negatives in your field?
Negatives? There are challenges.
Challenges.
And so I don't like everything in production, but it's all necessary to reaching that goal. And so you endure those things, or you build a team of people with strengths that are opposite yours. And so I like to have great people on my team that I can refer to and say, here's my challenge. And oftentimes they say, oh, that's what I really like to do. So, well, great, you take this problem and figure it out and come back tomorrow and let me know what you came up with. And it's that collaboration. I think one of the challenges that most young people have is figuring out how to work together and on a team and let go. If you're the leader on a project, oftentimes you feel the responsibility that everything has to be right because you're the leader, and all eyes are on you. But you need to learn how to trust your team and let them do what they do and go with it. It may not be the way that you would do it. It may not be the way that you would write it or light it or shoot it. But you have to be able to let go and allow their creative input to shine through the project. It'll keep them involved in the project. It'll also show respect. It'll keep the team tight. And again, the stress that's inherently in production can be alleviated by having a team that's all on board.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, would you say the industry is growing or shrinking for, like, let's say this TV in general? Because I know, like, the streaming services like Netflix or like Hulu are really changing the game and really changing how things are being done. And
if you look at the industry in the recent history, there has been a massive increase in the demand for programming. And a couple things have happened. It has allowed smaller independent shops to flourish. It has also allowed a decline in quality. And so in the 80s, the news channels came out and really came of their own, CNN headline news. And they were allowed to basically just report on the world's happenings and sell advertising time all day long. And so they started to sensationalize all the news that they could find, so the more eyeballs would see, so that they could charge more. And that still rings true today. I mean, a cat gets stuck in a tree, and next thing you know, it's on CNN. Well, that kind of reporting of the world's happenings turned into what we call reality TV. And no longer did you have to have a scientist with a thesis and a filmmaker with quality equipment get together and spend a year making a program. You basically took a guy out of film school and some sensationalist reporter and threw them together for a week and came up with a couple episodes of whatever reality television that they were making. which is mostly scripted anyway.
Yeah.
And so the camera angles are shaky or out of focus, and it's really downgraded the quality standards in our industry. Now, at the same time, technology has just exploded. And so there is the upper echelon of people whose special effects, whose lighting effects, makeup effects, all of that are going crazy. And so one of the popular shows on TV now is Game of Thrones. And you look at the way that that is shot and the effects that are used in that show. And it really gives you a very good example of how to do quality programming. Now, some of the topics are risque and some of the action is graphic and violent. But from a production standpoint, you can look at that and go, wow, that was really well done.
So would you say that this would you say this is a good thing or a bad thing? This give and take, would you say, is it beneficial to the industry or is it harming the industry with allowing more people to, you know, create programming, but yeah, it's also decreasing the value or the work?
You know, it's hard for me to say, but I do know that a lot of this programming is catchy. And so you're capturing people's attention for some garbage programming. And as a whole of society, we're focused more on the entertainment of programming and less on major societal issues. And I think that's detrimental to our culture as a whole. You see examples of it in every community, in every age range. People are watching more and more television, or more video, or more programming on all sorts of devices. And they are really detracted from their community, from their neighborhood, from their family, from their spouses, their parents. And they're fulfilled with sensationalist junk.
Yeah.
And you can see it in young people, the language they use, the behaviors they engage in, societal. I mean, there are some really horrific criminal things that are happening. And a lot of that can be attributed to young people's exposure to graphic violence and language. And that's all learned. You don't come out of the womb being a hate monger or a serial murderer. I think a lot of that has to do with what we're allowing young people to see, what we're propagating, what we're pushing and promoting. It seems to be a competition in the industry of who can outdo the previous generation from a sensationalist, from a graphic, from a nudity standpoint, rather than a quality, enlightened element. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're saying that like rather than telling a better story, you're pushing the envelope of what you can show more or who can sensationalize what better rather than focusing more on the message behind it all.
Correct.
So for a young director, producer, creator, what would it take for them to create content that is entertaining, and then B, also has a great message behind it, and also C, that a studio or some kind of financial group can back?
One thing that I've seen in my career that works all the time is a quality representation of the truth. It could be a historical element or situation or a historical figure, but if you can educate and entertain, I call it infotainment. But if you could do both those things really well, I think you'll do very well in the industry. I recently saw a modern production about Abraham Lincoln, and it was very, very well done. Now, I've heard about Abraham Lincoln my entire life, studied him in school, seen television and movie programs about him. But again, some young guy was able to come in with modern cameras, modern perspective, new interviews of historians, and tell a very good story, do it very, very well. And that was something that I watched beginning to end, and the commercials in between. And as somebody who makes television, it's hard to get me to do that.
Yeah.
So I think if you can take some truth, some historical elements, and some high quality production elements and wrap them all into one project, you have a winner.
I hear that because I know for myself, I find it hard to watch, TV or movies just because I'm kind of the same way. That doesn't mean I can't get entertained by certain things, but for the most part, a lot of things are, I would say, have like a lot of things are crap. Unfortunately, that's really what it is. People ask me, "Have you seen this new show?" And I'm like, "Not really, because I don't really care about it. Like, what is it really about? This is another story about this another guy and doing whatever." And for me personally, because this is what I want to do as well. That's something I look heavily upon, like telling a story that has a message behind it, that has some kind of significant meaning. Because in media, we do control what people think and how the culture reacts. What you said, how people are growing up and how people are thinking, could be attributed to what they're seeing on TV or in film. I definitely agree with, because media has always been that kind of influencer. Now we have visual media, and I definitely agree with what you're saying. So thanks for the great insight. Switching gears though, and I kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to touch upon it a little bit more. Who do you look for? Who do you look towards inspiration? Who do you look up to when you're trying to get inspired by? When you try to get inspired to write a story or whatever.
So some of the things that I really like are documentaries. And if you go back and look at the National Geographic model of the late 60s and early 70s, they would take a scientist and a filmmaker and put them together for a year or more, give them $1 million, and have them come up with the story. What's the truth? They would research a topic, the scientist would research, and the filmmaker would film it and come up with that sort of thing. You fast forward to the late 80s, early 90s, and you have a guy named Ken Burns who did a piece on the Civil War, and he did a piece on baseball. And that really broke open the whole documentary genre to a lot of audiences that weren't into documentary. And so you take that to today, and now you have some really good storytellers that are not writing per se, and they're not scripting, they're blogging, they're vlogging. They are commenting on today's news from their own perspective. And it's instantaneous. And so there's some really interesting developments on the horizon of where communication is going. And if you look at that immediacy, those opinions, the people who are able to articulate, who are educated, have the background, have the knowledge, but can articulate sensible, hopefully, commentary on what's happening right now, I think will be the most watched, the most valued kind of young people of the future.
If you can go back and change anything in your career path or even in your early in your school years, what would you change and why, if anything?
I try not to feel regret. You make decisions as a young man, and at the time, you made those decisions for a reason. And so you stick with them. Good, bad, or indifferent, you do what you do. I was able to travel as a young man around the country and out of the country through Europe. And it was a great experience. And if I had to change something, I would have filmed more. I would have recorded my thoughts, my experiences, commentary, to have that to look back on. I have some photographs. I have some journal entries, but not nearly as much as I wish I had.
Yeah. Closing. What advice do you have for someone who is just starting out in the industry?
So our industry went from broadcasting, where our messages were sent out over the media outlets to all eyes and ears, to nowadays we focus on narrowcasting. We try to identify that specific audience, and then we're creating content specifically for them. Well, I think the same is true for young people getting into the industry. It used to be that you wanted to learn all aspects of the business, and so that you could be so well-rounded. And that's good early on to a certain point. But you reach a point where you really should pick one area of expertise and become really good at it. And so there are guys who are just lighting guys, there are guys who are just cameramen, or they're technical directors, they're writers. At some point, I would recommend you just identify what you really want to do. For me, it was editing. I always wanted to be an editor. And I like the ability to get in and do the reveals and cut the piece together. But to edit, I had to have things to edit. So I started to shoot, write. And now as a producer, I find most of my work is in creating content. But I'm most at home in the edit studio.
Picking back off what you just said, what if you have like an interest in, say, like for me, I have an interest in writing and directing / producing. Should I just focus on one before the other, or should I try to manage both at the same time?
If you're truly interested in something, you can't help but see it. And so I see good direction and poor direction in the products that I view personally, or good writing or bad writing in those same things. So you'll always be exposed to it. And because you're interested in it, it'll always be there, always resonate with you. But you may find that you have a particular, you excel at one thing over another. And from a business standpoint, that you're in demand as a writer, but not as a director, or as a producer and not as a writer. Though you still like writing, you can continue to write. You can perfect your directing skills. But from a business standpoint, you got to do what the client is asking you to do. And so, you go where the money is.
Go where the money is. All right. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank my friend Kurt for giving his time and allowing me to interview him. Thank you,
You're very
sir.
welcome. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Come back next time.